and welcome to a special edition of COS Live. I'm your host today, Rita Peters. I am the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And in just a few moments, we're expecting a hearing in the Kansas House Committee on Federal and State Affairs. They will be taking testimony and deliberating on the Convention of States Action resolution, which is pending in this Kansas committee today. Senator Rick Santorum is there on the ground in Topeka, and he's standing by to give testimony in favor of our resolution, which calls for an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution on just three topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and limits on federal scope and jurisdiction. Now, 17 states have already passed our resolution, and this year it's being considered by a number of other states as well. It's over 20 at this point, and Kansas is one of those. So how did we get here? It always starts with we the people. The COS Kansas team has been busy building support across the state. Over 37,000 Kansans have signed the COS petition, and many of them are expected to be there for the hearing today. A recent scientific survey revealed that 2/3 of Kansas voters, that's 67%, are in favor of an Article 5 Convention of States to propose constitutional amendments that limit federal spending, limit federal power, and establish term limits for Congress and/or federal judges and bureaucrats. That is exactly what this committee is about to consider in just a few moments. Additionally, it's good for you to know that the platform of the Kansas Republican Party supports the calling of an Article 5 Convention of States so that the states can reassert their constitutional power. Other prominent endorsements include the former Kansas Senate President Susan Wagle and former Lieutenant Governor Tracy Mann. President Dwight Eisenhower, who was from Kansas, was also known for supporting the Article 5 Convention as a means to protect self-governance. Last year, we uncovered the historic audio of that speech, which you can find on our website. In Kansas, we have secured a majority of state representatives' support in the past. The problem is that the Kansas Constitution requires a 2/3 majority vote on all Article 5 legislation. So it is a big hurdle, but the Kansas team has been working really hard to get this done. If the vote is successful in committee, then Kansas would go to the floor for consideration by the full Kansas House and then later, hopefully, the Senate. Now, it's important for you to know that the committee will probably not vote today. They will just hold this hearing and take testimony. And then what they typically do in Kansas is that the committee will later go into an executive session and vote on the resolution. But it'll be really interesting to see the testimony and to see how these Kansas representatives respond to the testimony there. Now, as I mentioned, a number of other states are considering the Convention of States resolution this year. So far, those include Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, South Dakota, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, and even Wyoming. Now, I also mentioned that 17 states have already passed the resolution. Those 17 that are already in the stable are Georgia, Alaska, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Tennessee, North Dakota, Arizona, Missouri, Texas, Arkansas, Utah, Mississippi, and just last month we added Wisconsin and Nebraska to get to 17. We need 34 states to pass the resolution in order to trigger the convention. So the fact that we have 17 now means that we are halfway there, folks. In other Convention of States news, last week a subcommittee of the Iowa Senate State Government Committee advanced our resolution to the full committee for consideration, with 2 senators voting in favor and the other not voting. So next it goes to the full committee, and we are expecting that committee to take up our resolution at noon Eastern Time today. So we may be back on with more live coverage for you later today, and we do expect that Iowa Senate committee to take a vote today as well. Earlier this week, the Pennsylvania Senate State Government Committee reported our resolution out favorably with a 7-4 vote. So it is now pending on the floor of the Pennsylvania Senate. We're waiting to see what will happen there. On Monday, the West Virginia House Judiciary Committee held a public hearing on our resolution, and our grassroots were there in full force. There was only one opponent in that room to testify against the resolution, and you know who she was? A paid lobbyist from the ACLU. That committee has not voted yet, but we are expecting them to take action soon. Now, there has been one bit of bad news so far this year. Yesterday, the South Dakota Senate declined to calendar our resolution by a vote of 16-19. Although this is a very disappointing setback, the COS South Dakota team made tremendous progress this year by getting the resolution through the House side, which was not expected. They are already planning action steps to finish up the job in South Dakota in 2023. Now let's go to the East Coast. We have an exciting update on the state of Massachusetts. Last week, a Massachusetts committee voted unanimously to advance our resolution. So congratulations to the Convention of States Massachusetts team on this incredible victory. We are hoping to get the legislative sponsor on a future episode of COS Live to tell us how he was able to achieve that impressive win. Thanks to our successes in 2021, we're already halfway home in South Carolina and North Carolina. We've passed in one chamber in both of those states, and so we're just looking to finish up the job this year in the other chambers. Keep an eye on South Carolina and North Carolina because they do have 2-year sessions. So we're just looking for the Senate in South Carolina and the North Carolina Senate to finish the job. So again, if you're a resident of South Carolina or North Carolina, call your state senators and tell them you want them to vote yes for COS. So we've got about a minute to go before the committee in Kansas is scheduled to meet. And if you're just joining us, this is going to be a live broadcast of the Kansas House Federal and State Affairs Committee, where they're going to be taking up our resolution. Rick Santorum, the former senator, is on hand to testify in support of our resolution, and we expect a number of our grassroots volunteers to be there as well to give testimony. And again, we do expect to hear a lot of testimony and to see probably some questions from committee members and hear some deliberation. We do not expect this committee to vote today. So this is just the hearing portion. Every state does it a little bit differently, and Kansas tends to have the public hearing in committee and then go into executive session at a later point for the actual vote. So that's what we're looking to have happen here today. Okay, and the session should start streaming in just a minute in this committee. It looks like they're starting now, so let's go live. I know that you do have that audio from President.
Committee members, if you would take your seats. Thank you. I'm looking to the WebEx director. Can you tell me if I have members online?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I believe the only person is Adam Thomas, and also Representative Potter just joined the meeting as well.
Thank you. First up will be bill introductions from committee members. Yes, Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a RS number 3006. It's relating to crimes involving controlled substances, replacing the rebuttal presumption with a permissive inference.
Thank you. Committee without objection? No objection noted. We've accepted the bill. The chair has two bills to be introduced for a fellow representative in the House. One is 22 RS 2548, which has to do with limiting cost recovery of replacing coal-fired electric generation facilities in rates requiring public utilities to purchase certain electricity generated from coal-fired facilities. Without objection. No objection noted. We will accept the bill. Second bill is 22 RS 2549, establishing electric generation requirements for certain renewable energy resources that provide baseload generation supply to public utilities. Again, without objection, it is accepted. Mike? Bill introductions from the audience. Seeing no bill introductions from the audience, bill introductions is closed. Committee will take up a hearing on the House Concurrent Resolution 5027, applying to the Congress of the United States to call a convention of states. The reviser will give us an overview.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I passed out to committee members a copy of Article 5 of the United States Constitution. I won't read it, but it's in front of you. This concurrent resolution, I think, is self-explanatory. If you read lines 21 through 28, you get the gist of what's going on. There's lots of people here, and I will answer questions if you got them, but
questions for the reviser? Seeing no questions for the reviser, thank you, Mike. We have a number of proponents today. The first up will be Rick Santorum, Senior Advisor to the Convention of the States and former United States Senator from the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think I may have some standing here to testify here today. I, like many of you here, have run for office in the state of Kansas, and I did that back in 2012, and I always, every time I come to Kansas, I have to just say thank you very much. You guys were very kind to me here and provided me, whether it was the largest or near the largest margin of victory I had in that primary session, I have very fond memories from the state of Kansas, so it's great to be back here. And thank you for having me. I'm here as a convert. I was someone who, for many, many years, was not a supporter of the Convention of States, and several things have happened in the past few years. Number one, I really took some time, and I think that's really part of the problem is people don't really take the time to dig into this. This is a new issue. This doesn't happen all the time, particularly an issue as novel as a convention of the states. It's not something that happens in America. It's never happened in this country. And so most people don't know much about it. I was one of them. And so I was giving a bunch of speeches talking about my frustration with what was going on in Washington, D.C. And a lot of it was historical. It's been going on for a while. We have a great Constitution, but let's just be honest, the Constitution that was passed in some ways is good, is not identical to it is today. We've passed 17 constitutional amendments since the founding, many of which were absolutely necessary to improve our Constitution and to make our union more perfect. But there have been a lot of amendments to the Constitution that we didn't go along with. And those were done exclusively by the United States Supreme Court. I mean, we just have to recognize this Constitution has been amended to almost, something that our founders would not recognize, and particularly with respect to the power of the federal government. I mean, there were provisions put in place by our founders to make sure that the people would be the center of power and have these freedoms protected, and the states would be a major player in the governance of this country, and that has been stripped away by Supreme Court decision after Supreme Court decision. The enumerated powers in the Constitution don't really mean anything anymore. And so you can say, well, what do we do about it? Well, if the Constitution has been amended, is there a way for us to fix it? Yes, two ways. The gentleman laid out Article 5. The founders put in the Constitution a provision that allows for amendments when things went awry in Washington, D.C. And the two ways were for Congress to propose amendments, which they have done periodically, and the second way, which is for the states to propose amendments. It's really important to understand that the Article 5 Convention of States is not a convention to change the Constitution. It's a convention to propose changes to the Constitution, which then you, the states, will ratify or not ratify. So that's an important point that I think people tend to miss sometimes. And the reason that it sort of brought me to this point where I'm up here now going around the country testifying on this is I always saw the constitutional abuse, from my perspective, is something that happened on the left. I mean, if you look at the New Deal court and some of the other court decisions, and you look at what folks in Washington who have tried to accumulate more power, centralize more power, it's always been on the left, and it's been approved and plotted on the left. You heard Joe Biden the other day talk about how the Constitution is what we say it is, and it can move around, and that was something that was you live with, and there was always that debate. Fine. But what I saw in the last administration really caused me to make a change. I started hearing Democrats talk about authoritarian president, and that Donald Trump was actually going out there passing things that he knew were unconstitutional. And as someone who's a Republican who supported almost everything that Donald Trump did, I loved the things he did. I didn't like the way he did them. And it bothered me greatly when my colleagues, folks who I served with in the Senate, would applaud him for doing things that clearly were beyond his scope of office. And Democrats would complain about it. Now, they didn't complain when they did it, but that doesn't give us excuse not to complain about it when we did. And so it was that departure where I now see that both sides are so much against each other that they're willing to throw aside process to get what they want. That's a dangerous time in America. It's a dangerous time in this country, where we have rules and procedures in place. We have this framework of a Constitution to protect liberty, and we've now said, nope, our partisan goals are more important than those processes. How do you put that genie back in the bottle? Well, see, I think our founders actually wrote Article 5 for that reason. I think our founders, if they came back today, would look and say, to you, who they gave this power to, why haven't you used it? I mean, is it really not obvious to every single one of you that Washington can't fix itself? Isn't it obvious to all of you that this power accumulation that we're seeing, and now the public is up in arms because of mandates and everything coming from Washington telling you how to live your life, isn't it obvious that that is not going to get better on its own? Isn't it obvious that the Congress has given up its checks and balances and now just sits on the sideline because they're incompetent to do anything and just cheer one side or the other, whoever gets into the presidency, and lets the president run the show? Is this the republic that you want to leave to the next generation? And I would suspect, again, Republicans and Democrats, the answer is no. No. And only one body in this country has the power to do anything about it. And I'm talking to you. Only the state legislatures were given that power. They trusted you. They didn't trust the federal government. They didn't trust the courts. No, the founders trusted you. I don't think there's anything that you will do in your time in the legislature that'll be more important than this. There's nothing. Because this is a chance to get the American public to come together at a convention of states where all states are represented and have a national discussion about what our country should look like. Where should the powers be and who should have them? and have that discussion of how to limit the power of the federal government and return some freedom and responsibility back. And people talk about all sorts of things that could happen. You know what? They talked about that in 1787. And thankfully, we had people of courage who were willing to stand up and say, no, what we have here isn't working. And had the courage to do something that I think is increasingly rare in politics. One of the greatest things that I have seen in my time, and I was in Washington for 16 years and ran for president a couple times, there are very few people of courage who are willing to stand up and do the right thing, even though it may or may not be popular. We have a lack of courage, and the lack of courage is because we are overcome with fear. Everybody I have talked to who is against this, everybody you'll listen to, the first thing they'll say is, I'm afraid this will happen. I'm afraid that will happen. I'm afraid this. Fear. Fear. Thank God those people weren't here in 1789, because we wouldn't be here. You can't be governed by fear. If you don't trust the American people, if you don't trust you know what they're afraid of? When they come up here and they say they're afraid of you. Why? Because you're going to control this process. The state legislatures are the ones who are going to appoint the delegates to this convention. So they're afraid of you. So if you don't vote for this, basically what you're telling me, you don't trust yourself. You don't trust yourself to be able to go there into a convention and actually have a discussion that's worthy of the moment. Our country is deeply divided. Having a national conversation, it will be. We have a national convention. We have a convention of states where all 50 states come together to talk about how to change the Constitution to limit the power of the federal government. Every kid in high school and college, every kid in grade school will have to learn what the Constitution's about. They aren't now. We're going to have a discussion about what roles and responsibilities are. How exciting is that? How unifying could it be? How necessary is it? I trust you, not because I know you, but because you've been put in a position to save the Republic, and I think you can rise to meet that occasion. Will it be perfect? No, nothing. Does anybody believe the original Constitution was perfect? It was not. No one in this room can raise their hand and say it was perfect. It was not. But it didn't stop us. At a time when this country is fracturing, final point, the only way this country survives is the only way it survived for 200 years, and that is federalism. We have a situation in our country right now where people in Washington believe it's best for them to tell how everybody should live in this country. Now, I know some people like that. Some people want Washington to tell us how to do everything, and that there should only be one standard and everybody should be the same. But I don't think that's how most Americans look at it. I think people in Kansas want to live the way they want in Kansas, and people in New York and California want to live differently, and that's okay. In fact, it's necessary because we're so diverse, we need to have the flexibility to live our values and morals in a different environment. It's all right. And so what this will do, restricting the power of the federal government, will allow our country to stay united on the things that matter, the big things, and allow division and diversity in areas where you decide to live where you want to live for the values you want to have represented in your own lives. It's okay. That's what's at stake here. That's what's the opportunity for this country to get it right again and have that balance properly in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator, would you mind standing for a few questions? I'm going to allow a limited amount of questions from committee members. Committee members, are there questions? Yes, Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, I've had some folks reach out with concern on how will the states select their delegates to go, because then they're worried that it's not going to be the proper representation. So what is the answer to that?
So a convention of states is a convention of sovereign bodies, of sovereign entities. So each state will have one vote. The delegations can be whatever size the legislature determines. Each state will make their own decisions as to who will be the delegates representing the state. Some will use the legislature, some the governor list, some the governor. It all depends on the state, and that will be a debate within each state. So I can't answer that globally, but the states will appoint their delegates, and each state delegation will get a vote.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. You answered part of my question already in that each state at the convention would have one vote. And it resembles the Electoral College in some way, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of a convention of states is a convention of sovereign entities. And so, like the United States Senate, they come as a distinct body, and the idea of, I mean, someone suggested, well, it could be, popular vote. I mean, you could have California have 50 and Kansas have 5. Here's the interesting thing: the states themselves will make that decision. And so I don't think that you're going to find many states who are willing to give away their vote to states that are more populous. So that's the thing that people, the convention makes their own rules. And so when you have the vast majority of states are not New York, California, Texas, and Florida, and so you're going to see states say, no, every state gets one vote, and that's how the process will work.
And so, just like in the Electoral College, delegations elected by a minority of citizens could end up making policy in a convention of states.
I'm sorry, one more time?
All right, just like in the Electoral College, when electors from states with a minority, in the Electoral College, we often see these days the person who gets the most electoral votes to not have the most popular votes. And a similar process could well occur in the Convention of States. Would you not agree?
I mean, every state will, again, whether you vote for a convention of states or not, we need 34 states to approve the resolution that's before you. Once that happens, all states are represented, and the state legislatures choose the delegations. So I suspect that if you have, a state that's a Republican state, they're going to appoint a majority of Republican legislators to make sure that that point of view is withheld. And same thing with the Democratic state. Sure. So I don't see any opportunity for subterfuge of the will of the legislature.
Thank you.
The legislature drives this train.
Thank you. I have two more folks that have questions, and I've cut it off. Representative Arnkamp, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator. You mentioned that some people have, I think the word you used was fear. So it's interesting. So when I look at, back in the 1700s, right, the Americans who were at these conventions, just what their approach to government was at that time, and then maybe compare that to some of the more modern concepts. We see back then a certain caliber, a certain understanding of government, the role of government. But today we see, I think, 39 states have expanded Medicaid, right? Expanded the government's involvement in healthcare. Just this week, we had pretty much super majorities in what many claim is a conservative legislature here in Kansas. Our House and our Senate voted to approve over $1 billion giveaway to some unknown business. So we're going to pay them a check out of the state general fund over $1 billion over the next 10 to 15 years from taxpayers' dollars to just some business because they might come to Kansas, or they're going to come to Kansas with a hopeful return of maybe an ROI after these 10 to 15 years. That's kind of the mindset. So,
Representative, would you ask the question, please?
So when you say fear, what's the difference between fear and also just an understanding of the difference between political mindsets back then to the political mindsets of today?
That's a very legitimate question. So here's what I would say. Number one, if you look at the resolution itself, the resolution itself talks, the three provisions that are in the resolution all relate to limiting the power of the federal government. One is just that, limiting the power. Amendments would be eligible that would limit the power. One would be to limit the fiscal restraint and limit terms of federal officials. So the resolution on which the convention is called is limited in nature to those areas. So The idea that some have suggested that this might be used to give the federal government more power would be out of order because it's not within the confines of what the convention was called for. So that's number one. Number two, any amendment that is proposed has to get 26 votes in the convention, and then has to go to 38 states. I mean, you mentioned Medicare expansion. Well, I suspect that you wouldn't have Medicaid expansion, if the federal government wasn't paying 90% of it, right? So that's a very different situation than someone saying, well, I want the federal government to take more of a role in healthcare. The federal government is, in a sense, bribing you to take that. I think that's a very different thing, and I think most members here treat that very differently than what should the role of the federal government be, or what should the role of the state government be. That's actually maybe a point in favor of doing this. You have so much federal coercion right now going on to the states to get them to do things that may not otherwise do. And this is an opportunity to carve that back, to say, you know what, stop bribing us, stop bullying us. Let's put some restraints in place that the federal government gets back more to what the founding principles were as in areas that they should be working in, and not maybe in the area of healthcare so much, or education, or things that under the original Constitution were left to the states. So I think you actually make the point that we need this because you're being bullied by the states right now, by the federal government, to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do.
Thank you. Last question, Representative Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In case there's additional confusion on impacts of neighboring culture, indigenous presence, I have a really big question on how will this impact tribal sovereignty in a good way, negative way. Can you elaborate more on that?
Again, this is not an area of expertise of mine. I'll just say that straight up front. And so I may not be the best person to answer this question. But again, I think I would just go back to what I said before, which is all of these amendments would be offered just like in a legislative body. You have rules, they'd be proposed, they'd be debated, and they'd be voted on. And all aspects of those amendments would be discussed with, and certainly I'm sure there will be representatives there to make sure that the discussion of how it would affect tribal governments would be part of that discussion of what any amendment would do. So I think it goes to the specific nature of the amendment that would be proposed, and if there would be any impact on the Native American community, that would be discussed at the convention. So to say writ large how it would be, I think it would depend on the amendment that's being proposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question, Senator. Thank you. Next up will be Representative Berquist, the one who brought this House concurrent resolution to us. At this time, we have a number of other proponents. I'm going to limit you to 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. You can cut me off when I'm done, all right?
I'll try not to do that.
Mr. Chairman and House Fed and State Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to share a few words. My words are mostly not my own, but words that I ascribe to as a young man, a very young man, and that those words are from the Declaration of Independence and some from the Constitution. My words are from my heart, my desire to preserve and refine a nation and a system of government, not to destroy. Following the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, the words go like this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, instituting new government, laying its foundation in such principles, and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed shall dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to alter the forms to which they've become accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, deriving invariably the same object, events are designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and organize new forms for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Alter is the key word. This declaration and this Constitution we all swore to uphold and protect, along with its articles and its amendments, are established to preserve freedom and civil government for ours and generations to come. Thank you for your consideration and this debate of Article 5 and the Convention of States. I hope that for generations to come, we will have preserved, by good debate, by good convention, and by good government, to honor our Lord. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Representative Yu, we remain in the area. At the conclusion of the other conferees, we'll have questions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next up, we're honored to have a senator from the state of Kansas, Senator Stuffus. Welcome to the House, Fed and State.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm grateful to get to speak to this fine body of representatives. I am here in support of House Resolution 5027. It's very near and dear to my heart. I've been very fortunate to become the steward of a farm and ranch in southern Kingman County. And on that ranch land, buffalo used to roam in infinite numbers. I, to this day, have buffalo wallows where the big bulls used to dust themselves in the summers. We found skulls of buffaloes from centuries gone by. And I think of a lone bull buffalo standing on our Kansas grass prairie, and it's been through battles. It has scars. It has healed scars and it has open scars. And there's wolves circling it and tearing it down from the exterior. But within the inside, that bull is sick as well. And the analogy is that our federal government has a sickness inside of it. And that's the career politicians and their unlimited spending that is literally killing us day by day by day. It is hard. It is hard to stand up and do the right thing. It's particularly hard to stand up and do the right thing before everybody else knows. I have those battle scars to prove it. But as I get those battle scars, my heart soars to pursue the truth and pursue what's right and to try to save the greatest nation in the history of mankind. Is a noble cause. And this resolution has the opportunity to do that. And I encourage you all to let your heart soar and be bold. Bold as a lion, answering only to God. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator, again, I would ask you, that's not appropriate in a committee room. It's not appropriate in a courtroom, and I will not allow it. Everyone has an opinion. There may be some for this and some against it, but we will not show that in this committee room. Thank you. We have a number of other proponents. I would like to call Angela Cushing. Ms. Cushing, if you'd come forward. Again, if you'll watch my vice chair, she'll give you the signal. You're given 3 minutes, and thank you for coming here today, and welcome to Federal and State Affairs.
Thank you for allowing me to come in. Can you hear me okay?
He'll turn the microphone on for you. I'm sorry. There's a button there.
Okay, all right. Thank you for having me in here today. I spent the year of 2021 traveling Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri, informing people of a national heritage area that was going in Kansas, Nebraska, and one that was already there and has been there for 15 years in southeast Kansas. To my astonishment, nobody knew. and our Freedom of Information requests show that that was deliberate. For 5 years, they courted our congressmen, lobbied against the people without their knowledge that their private property was going into a national heritage area. What a national heritage area is federal jurisdiction. And federal jurisdiction comes in many forms, wildlife parks, preserves, whatever. The point is federal jurisdiction. And the reason that federal jurisdiction goes in is for a federal land management plan. This is Freedom's Frontiers Federal Land Management Plan for Southeast Kansas. This is all about preservation of private property that no private landowner had any idea that was there. 19 million acres encompasses this. Once that jurisdiction is established, then it becomes implementation. Implementation is used by any means necessary, depending on the political leanings, depending on the favor of the courts, and depending on what federal offices are the strongest in the area. It's probably no coincidence that on Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area website is this map. This is an endangered species map. This is probably one of the mechanisms that they're going to use to enforce this federal land management plan. We haven't seen much of it yet, and probably won't until Senate Bill 1942 gets passed. That is legislation that funds these indefinitely and gives that control of these land management plans directly to the Department of Interior, the same Department of Interior that's been tasked to implement 30 by 30. We have been traveling all over these states asking county commissioners to pass resolutions. 50 counties have passed resolutions saying they do not want their county in the National Heritage Area. Yet, they're still going in. They're still active. They're still there. They're still lobbying Congress. The only way to end this completely and permanently is for an amendment that confines the use of land management plans of the federal government on private and state lands. So I ask you to please consider Convention of States application and pass it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. If you would remain in the area, at the conclusion, there may be questions. Thank you for coming here today. Next up, Mr. Lynn McAllister. Good morning, sir. And welcome to House Veterans State Affairs.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad to be here. And I am in favor of Convention of the States. There are many reasons why we could call a convention. I'm going to look at one today and explain my point, and I'm carrying a battle scar that's mentioned. It's executive orders. That's been in abuse from president to president, and it continues to increase in strength. We're now, rather than being a constitutional republic, we represent more a dictatorship. Before I go any further, I want to thank you all for passing the special hearing bill HB 2001, for I put that into application with my place of employment, which would be Tyson Fresh Meats in Emporia, Kansas. You passed that after much deliberation, debate, discussion, which would be similar to what a convention of states would do if you were to pass convention of states. It would be exactly what you do. You've already done it. You have the experience. You have the folks here that are experienced to do that. Joe Biden, in July of 2021, mandated a vaccine mandate for all companies with more than 100 employees. Well, at Tyson Fresh Meats, that's what we have. We have well over 100 in Emporia. So, in July, he does that. In August of that year, Tyson mandated a vaccine policy that all team members, as they call us, would be fully vaccinated by November 1. They said they were going to take religious and medical exemptions, which they did, but none of the medical exemptions were accepted. My religious exemption had two options. Option number one, go on an unpaid, no limit leave of absence, or termination. I didn't call that a reasonable accommodation or exemption. So I could go further with how that all happened, but I'm going to end with this. In 1964, Ronald Reagan gave a speech called A Time for Choosing. And here's part of the speech. The Founding Fathers knew a government can't control economy without controlling the people. They knew that a government that sets out to do that must use force, coercion to achieve its purpose, so we have come to a time of choosing. You and I are told we must choose between left or right, but I suggest that there's only up or down. The maximum of individual freedom consistent with order, or down to an ant heap of totalitarianism. And in his speech, he quoted James Madison. We base all of mankind on self-government. This idea that government was beholden to people, that it had no other source of power, is still the newest and most unique in the long history of man's relationship to man.
Thank you, sir. I've gave you an extra 30 seconds. but-
Okay, thank you. Please pass Convention of States.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Barbara Norman. Ms. Norman here. Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to Federal and State Affairs.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's the most beautiful Capitol. And my name is Barbara Norman, and I am the district captain for HD 107, and I live in Concordia. Now, I'm down here, and I was asked by my beautiful group of COS advocates to come and speak to you today. Not because I'm the most brilliant, but because I have the most unique perspective. I'm new to Kansas, only a year. I've lived a year in Concordia, but I am registered to vote. You all come to me on a complete blank slate. I don't know who's Republican. I don't know who's Democrat. I don't know how you voted in the past. I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about how the federal bodies in this state have worked or what their track record are. I'll learn about it, but what I'm interested in is Convention of States. What I am interested in is freedom. Where did I come from? I took the first big wind and opportunity I had and blew over to Kansas from California. Let's stop there. Let me tell you about my representation in the state of California by federal officials, by the state and the Senate. I mean, the Congress and the Senate. I'm neither Republican or Democrat. I own no allegiance to either party. I don't even particularly care for a two-party system. So I have no allegiance to anyone. Let me tell you who has been representing me. Nancy Pelosi, Barbara Feinstein, Eric Swalwell, Adam Schiff, Cory Booker, and last but not least, my particular jurisdictional U.S. Senator, and for a little while, Attorney General for the state of California, is our current Vice President. 30, only 30 seconds? Okay.
You have 30 seconds left.
All right, well, I'm going to have to wind it up. I'm going to address very quickly, I'm going to the heart of the matter and look for the objections and look for the opposition in this. One, it's a racist group. It is not a racist group. I'm Jewish. I have grandchildren that are biracial. It's white supremacist. I would not align myself, nor have I seen any indication of that. Unless this group or this state is on the whole those things, you're not going to have that type of behavior in Convention of States. And the most important thing, our document was founded on God. We can't pretend it wasn't. It's the most taboo thing in the world right now to speak of God. It is interwoven in our document. We are endowed by our creators, not just as states, but as individuals. So you are a body that takes care of us, but we have individual rights. And I would ponder as to whether or not a state could be violating the individual's U.S. constitutional rights by interfering with them bringing a convention
Thank you very
of
much, ma'am.
states.
I gave you additional time, but we must move on. Thank you for appearing here today.
Okay.
If you would remain, there may be questions later.
I hope so.
Thank you. Next up, David Copeland. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Federal and State Affairs again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to be back. I wished I wouldn't have to come back, but we're here. And I represent the grassroots. A couple of years ago in this very room, I said that I was here representing about 19,000 petition signers. That number's up to 39,000. In the last 12 months, we had 40% growth in the state of Kansas. People who want to get involved, they've seen what's going on, and they're looking at us, they're looking at you. Those petitions go to you. They're looking at you for the solution the founders put in Article 5. And it's interesting, when we began this, the discussion was about the federal government is requiring people to buy something, whether they want it or not. And that was deemed an intolerable act, a usurpation of individual liberty. And many of us came to this cause because of that. I look at the list of things today that's going on, and that's on page 2. We have, just in the last few days, seen our Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, our federal government talk about rules going to financial institutions to score companies for environmental social governance to decide whether or not they should get a loan, their credit worthiness based on things that have nothing to do with how that loan would be repaid, but on a social score, an environmental score. And who is standing up to fight that? Well, fortunately, I understand there's going to be a bill in this House that will do that. But again, this is a role of state legislatures to step up and fight the federal government. We have a government now that doesn't, our government uses its power against its citizens. Who would have thought that? That's why we've seen the growth of Convention of States supporters, petition signers in the state of Kansas and around the country. And the last thing is, there was hints of corruption years ago when we started. Today it's naked. Today it's right out there. And there's a justice system. Our Justice Department doesn't want to tackle both sides of corruption. So we've got to put an end to that. And like my friends have said here before me, the founders gave you that role. And I thank you for stepping up and being willing to hear us and take action.
Thank you, sir. Would you remain?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to go to questions now. So there may be some questions for you. If not, committee members, if you have questions, if you would identify. Yes, Representative Epley, who's your question for?
My question is for Senator Stephan.
Okay. Then Senator Stephan, if you'd be so kind. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Senator Stephan, for being here today, giving your testimony. It's great to be here for this noble cause. But my question is, I think, pretty straightforward. you know, you probably would have more input into this than anyone else that's given testimony, and that would be how we would seat or come to a conclusion of who would be our delegate to Convention of the States, because it would be decided by the House of Representatives and certainly by the Senate. I didn't know if you had thoughts or response on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the question, Senator Mark Steffen, for the record. I have personally volunteered before, and I will volunteer again today. I'm not the exact expert on that process. I appreciate that question. I do have access to the Montana law professor who's written multiple textbooks on this. We'll figure that out. That will be figured out. That will be done fairly. I'm confident that we have the ability to do that adequately. And again, like I say, I certainly volunteer to serve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
While we have the senator up here, is there other questions for the senator for you to have to be playing up and down? Okay, good. Questions for other conferees? Committee. Senator Representative Smith.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I don't think you have that authority, but I appreciate it. My question is for Mr. Copeland. My question is, this convention, what legal authority would it have, either through a legislature or the Constitution, to ratify any decision that it makes and make it law of the land?
That's a softball question. It has absolutely no authority except to propose amendments, just as Article 5 says. No more authority than Congress can propose amendments. In each case, it takes ratification by 38 states to make any change to the Constitution.
I asked that softball question because of comments made earlier, fear of what they might be able to propose and complete at this convention. And I wanted to be clear in that testimony, so I thank you for that.
Well, if I could add one thing about fear. Courage is not an absence of fear. Courage is acting in spite of your fear. And that's what we need from this body and the one across the hall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have Representative Howe. You have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Senator Santorum. Senator, thank you for coming to Kansas. We appreciate your participation in today's hearing. Could you comment a little bit about your personal experience of when you came into Congress, what the federal debt was, and when you left? And also, are executive orders a problem to any one party, or is it a problem no matter who is in the executive branch?
Well, I actually served in the United States Senate when we had a balanced budget in the last years of the Clinton administration, and we were on actually a path. We actually came in, one of the first votes I cast when I came to the Senate was on a balanced budget amendment. People may forget, back in 1995, it actually passed the House of Representatives, got Democratic support, and in the Senate, we had 13 Democratic senators at the time willing to vote for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and it failed because one Republican at the last minute switched his vote. So there was an effort at the time, back in the 90s, both Democrats and Republicans, to get our fiscal house in order. That has just left Washington. Nobody even talks about it in either side. And one of the reasons, I said I've sort of made this metamorphosis of coming in out in support of this. And one of the reasons is we've completely lost our fiscal sanity, and it's a bipartisan issue. If it was just one side, I'd say, okay, get in there, keep fighting. But both sides have lost all fiscal discipline at this point, and case in point, we're now buying off states to get them to do what we want and throwing money everywhere, and that has to stop, or the end is fairly certain. Your second half of the question, I'm sorry, was?
Yes, Senator, regarding executive orders, in your experience, is it a problem limited to any particular party, or is it?
We've always had executive orders, and executive orders, as you know, were there to clarify laws that Congress passed and the president authored and do things consistent with the legislation. And what's happened most dramatically over the last 3 administrations is that now they see the ability to author executive orders that are inconsistent with what Congress, the law is and what Congress's intent is, and in many cases, what Congress recently voted on. In the case of, I remember President Obama with DACA, I mean, the House and Senate voted those things down, and the President went ahead and issued an executive order. So it's hard to say that executive orders are what they were intended to be, which is to take care of situations that change after laws have passed in order to make them work consistent with what the intent of the Congress was. And now we have, again, both sides out there using authority they do not have, and you have a Congress, which is the most important thing, is that Congress has become so feckless they're afraid to do anything. So they simply just cheer on the executive when they get in power. And you can say, well, that's good and bad, but the bad thing is every 4 years or every 8 years, we see this radical change in how our government, we don't have consistency of laws. We have, one day, you have the waters of the U.S., the next day you don't. And there's just, you can't live this way. I mean, businesses, our country is, stability is an important part. Stability of law is an important part, and we're losing that. And again, I wish there was another way. I wish I wasn't up here. This is a big step, but it's the step that our founders put in place. That in case of emergency, break glass and pull this and give it a shot.
Thank you, Senator, for sharing your testimony.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions from members. Representative Clayton. Question, who directed to who?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question could be for any of the proponents or it could be for staff. I just want to be refreshed as to how many states need to pass this in order for this to occur, and then how many already have. So I'd like to know just how close we are. So whoever could take
Senator,
that.
would you?
Since I'm close, you need 34 states to pass it under Article 5. You need 2/3 of the states to pass a resolution, and under Article 5, if 34 states pass the identical resolution, it's very, very clear, and it says in the Constitution, the Congress shall call a convention. So they have no authority to do anything other than to call a convention. And as I was just talking about before, I don't see Congress sticking their nose in this. First off, I don't think they could pass anything with respect to this. They could agree on anything. So I think they will wash their hands of this, appoint a convention, and then the states will go forward. 17 states have passed this particular resolution, the identical language that you have before you. 2 just in the last few weeks. I think at least from what I'm hearing, and some of the other states I've visited, 2 or 3 other states are very, very close to doing so here in the next few weeks. So there is clearly a momentum that's picking up across the country.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that we can all agree we don't like the federal government putting their noses in Kansas business. So thank you for being here, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Last question, Representative Miller. And who would you direct the question to?
That man that keeps getting up and down.
All right.
Thank you, Senator, for your testimony. One of the first sentences of your testimony was that you, at one point, opposed this measure. Why on earth would you oppose this kind of proposal?
Because when I first heard about it, I heard about it from a woman who I greatly respected and still do greatly respect, although she's passed away, and that was Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis came to me and said, this is a really dangerous thing. And, I was running for president at the time, and this was not a federal issue; it was a state issue. And so I just said, "Okay, Phyllis, I'll steer clear of this." And so I never really opposed it. Never came out opposed. I just never supported it. I always just said, "Look, this is not my issue," and so I never really paid much attention to it. Saw it as really what I didn't really pay attention to Article 5. It's not something, I'm a lawyer, and I certainly read the Constitution, but it's not an area that I don't think anybody pays a whole lot of attention to. because it's not used very often, and certainly a convention of states has never been used to propose amendments to the Constitution. So it's just not something I was familiar with, and as a result, I allowed willful ignorance to sort of rule the day until I saw what happened over the course of this time and started giving speeches about the dysfunction of Washington, the threats that I have outlined here. And a friend of mine who actually runs convention of the states, heard me give one of those and said, hey, have you ever thought about this? And that's when I did my homework. I really encourage people to, look, this is a big deal. And like I said, I don't know of anything bigger that you'll ever do. This is a big deal. And you owe it to yourself to read the literature on it, to understand it. I mean, you're all asking me questions, good questions. All those questions could be answered if you take the time to. I mean, it was mentioned the constitutional lawyer from Montana, Rob Natelson, who's wrote the definitive text on this called The Law of Article 5. There are lots of court cases on Article 5. You probably didn't know that. I didn't know that. We've had conventions of states in this country, not to propose constitutional amendments, but other conventions of states, 40 of them. And there are laws in place. When I say laws, there's a Supreme Court law in place to govern these types of events. And again, most members, and again, I say that because I'm guilty of it, haven't taken the time to look at it. And I think if you do, and you look at it honestly and openly, you'll see that there are plenty of guardrails there. And if any argument could be made against doing this, in my opinion, the argument is that it's likely not to result in very much, because it's really hard to do. Amending the Constitution is hard to do, and it should be hard to do. And so the founders put very high bars in place to get 34 states to get resolutions through. That's hard. To get a majority at the convention to propose, not easy. You know this, in a legislative body, it's hard. And then to get 38 states to ratify it, really hard. And so the idea that we're going to have crazy amendments that are going to come out of here, well, what crazy amendment's going to get 38 states to ratify it? I mean, you can't get 38 states to agree to anything. So the idea of runaway conventions and terrible things and fear of all these horrible things, where is that coming from? Where do you see that anywhere in this country? I mean, just man up or woman up or whatever up and look at and realize this is really hard. And it's going to take consensus, and it's going to take the country having to have a debate and come together. And what's wrong with that? I mean, yeah, nothing may happen except this. You actually did it. You actually called a convention. You actually fired a shot across the bow of Congress and said, you know what? We did this. Maybe nothing happened, but you know what? Now we're not afraid to do it again. Now we're not afraid to do it when you guys really start moving more farther. So, nothing to fear but fear itself. The reality is there's nothing to fear here. There really isn't, because this country doesn't get things done easily anywhere. And so don't expect it to get done when you have high bars like 34 and 38 to get out of 50 to get things done.
Thank you for that. And I'm doing just what you asked us to do. I'm reading. Part of the problem is the more I read, the more diversity of opinion I run across. This guy says it's black, he's an expert. This guy says it's white, he's supposedly an expert. It really is an exciting proposition, and that's why I'm doing so much reading, is I am excited about what could happen. I'm just really struggling to sort out.
That's a great, thank you for saying that, because there are people who are, quote, experts. I mean, constitutional lawyers, some are not, but some are constitutional lawyers. And I would just say always check the credentials with the people you're reading, because that has something to do with it. But the other thing that's, you're legislators. I mean, we have to read the case law, and we have to read, quote, the experts. But you don't make decisions just on what the experts say, right? I mean, you make decisions on what you see and what you realize.
While I've got you, in my attempt to understand, and what I was just reading a short time ago was about the meeting in Philadelphia in 1787. Can you distinguish what happened then versus what's being proposed now?
Well, that was a constitutional convention. This is a convention of states governed by the Constitution. So there was a convention called to review the Articles of Confederation. It fell apart, didn't work. So the states came together and called a convention to draft a new constitution. The Congress went along with it subsequently to confirm that they were in favor of this. But it was a constitutional convention to rewrite the Constitution. This is a limited purpose convention of states to propose amendments to the existing Constitution under the rubric of this Constitution, which is 38 states having to approve this.
So in order to accomplish...
Representative, I'm going to stop you there. You can continue this conversation at the conclusion
I'm
of
just
the
trying to
hearing.
figure out why we're not doing that and actually getting something done as
And I
opposed to...
appreciate that, but I've also got a
Thank you.
time rule,
Thank
and
you.
I need to get the opponents in. With that, thank you, Senator. Chair will refer you to 13 written proponents. They are online in our committee notes. I need to, is there any other proponents? Seeing none, I'm closing the proponent section. I will go to the opponent section. I have one opponent listed, John Axtell. Is he here today? Good morning, sir, and welcome to Federal and State Affairs. Because you are the only opponent, I'm giving you 5 minutes.
May I have 8 to 10 minutes inconsistent with Senator Santorum's time?
No, I'm looking at my clock, and I have to manage this, and there may be questions afterwards that I need to leave time for. If we have time at the last, before 10:30, I will let you close out at that time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go right ahead, sir.
I'm John Axtell from Wichita, Kansas, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for Kansas Campaign for Liberty. Honorable Chairman, members of the House Fed and State Affairs Committee, I oppose H.R. 5027 for several reasons. First of all, nothing about Article 5 guarantees a safe convention. If we read the history where George Mason is noted as saying that he, quote, would sooner chop off his right hand than put it to the Constitution as it stands now, end quote, and that should his disagreements with the current Constitution not be addressed, then, quote, his wish would then be to bring the whole subject before another convention, end quote. He clearly did not like the Constitution. He did not sign the Constitution, and he clearly expressed his interest in throwing a runaway convention based on Article 5 in order to throw out that Constitution. As an anti-federalist, that was his intention. James Madison wrote, following this logic and this expressing concerns about Mr. Mason's sentiments, he wrote in a letter to Jefferson that, quote, if a second convention should be formed, it will be easy for those who have latent views of disunion to carry them on under the mask of contending for alterations. A runaway convention under the mask of contending for just amendments. The Convention of States also has on its own board a Professor Robbie George, who has helped prepare a dangerous alternate constitution. His constitution replaces the Second Amendment with the following, quote, neither the states nor the United States shall make or enforce any law infringing the right to keep and bear arms of the sort ordinarily used for self-defense or recreational purposes, provided that states and the United States in places subject to its general regulatory authority may enact and enforce reasonable regulations on the bearing of arms and the keeping of arms by persons determined with due process to be dangerous to themselves or others. The Second Amendment was written so that sovereign states and free people could defend themselves against a federal government that's gone out of control, even to the point of being tyrannical. And this is defending themselves against a federal government that they created and therefore have not only the right but the duty to control. This substitute Second Amendment might save your squirrel rifle and your rights to use it. Now, the actions, I want to make one more point, and that is the actions of the leading proponents of this resolution provide proof that this process cannot be trusted. Last year in the Senate committee, hearing a similar resolution, whereas we all know the Kansas Constitution requires a 2/3 supermajority to pass this resolution, and that needs to be in both chambers. I heard the lead proponent virtually demand that the legislature violate this constitutional requirement and declare this resolution passed with a simple majority. And he did that, demanded that they violate an oath that they swore under God to support the Kansas Constitution. Now, to justify his scheme, he pointed to legal opinion that said it was okay with the federal government, which, by the way, is the problem, for our legislature to ignore their state constitution because the Convention of States process, quote, cannot be constrained by the people of Kansas, end quote. So this person proposes to fix, quote unquote, the federal government by ignoring our state constitution, just because the feds say it's okay to do so. This willingness to brazenly violate the Kansas Constitution in a desperate attempt to pass their resolution is proof that no rules, not even the Constitution itself, will be honored at an Article 5 constitutional convention. This willingness to break the law is the problem. It is the cause of our nation's ills. So in conclusion, we must enforce the Constitution if we want to solve our nation's problems and reduce the size of our federal government. Proposed new amendments are not only unnecessary, but they are dangerous. And I agree with the proponents of the Convention of States that this Convention of States process, quote, cannot be constrained by the people of Kansas, end quote. I urge you to vote against HCR 5027, and thank you for your consideration of my testimony.
Thank you, sir. And questions? I have a question with Representative Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Axel, for your testimony. I do find it interesting that you choose two men, founders of our Constitution, to point out the faults of Article 5, when we know that George Mason was the one who first suggested that Article 5 include this language that included the states, and then James Madison in Federalist 43 stated, the Constitution equally enables the general and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors as they may be pointed out by the experience on one side or on the other. Can you explain why they have a different opinion in those writings than what you picked to give us there at the very beginning? What caused that change?
No, there's no change. It's just two different viewpoints. See, George Mason, Colonel Mason, was an anti-federalist. And his cohort from Virginia, Patrick Henry, actually went home. He didn't stick around. George Mason did not sign the Constitution, but his words are very clear that he would rather have his right arm chopped off than to have it be applied to signing the Constitution. And while he wasn't the particular person necessarily that asked for that second clause of Article 5 to be added, the Anti-Federalists were the contingent that did. Were the part of the Constitutional Convention that did request and obtain or accomplish that addition of that second provision. And like I said, Madison himself, and in his letter to Thomas Jefferson that I read from, made it very clear that his concern about the use of the second provision or clause in Article 5, his concern about that when invoked by George Mason and Patrick Henry, who he mentioned in his letter, although I didn't give that part of the excerpt, his concern was that it was going to be used to throw out the Constitution of 1787 and start over, which was the goal of the Anti-Federalists at that time. So, no, there's not a change of mind, there's not a change of heart, there's not all of a sudden a shift. This is the full story. This is the full story. That's not.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Axtell. I wish we had more time with you. You fascinate me. We heard in response to questions from the proponents that the authority of the Convention of States is merely to propose amendments. One, do you agree? If you don't agree, tell me why you don't. And if you do agree, what are you afraid of?
Okay, do I agree that the authority is to just propose amendments?
Yes, sir.
Well, the founders that I already mentioned and quoted from made it clear that regardless of what the representation is about proposing amendments, the first constitutional convention, the Convention of 1787, itself was a runaway convention. It began by having these delegates sent to amend the Articles of Confederation, and that amendment process, or excuse me, propose amendments to the Articles of Confederation, and that amendment process was supposed to subsequently be followed up by all 13 states being required to ratify those amendments. And the first thing that happened was that they changed the ratification process from a unanimous agreement to 9 states being required. So the precedent for a runaway convention had already been set. The founders invoked the Declaration of Independence in saying that the supreme governing principles of our nation are in the Declaration of Independence, and that if we feel bound by the provisions of the convention under which these delegates were sent to the convention, we have not only a right but a duty to throw those bounds off of our shoulders and do what we feel needs to be done. And that was the runaway convention, which was the Convention of 1787. And so that is the precedent that would easily cause people to, that they would again invoke to once again have a runaway convention, even though the Article 5 says that it's for the purpose of proposing amendments. Now, I'm not going to argue with James Madison, who in his letter to Thomas Jefferson said they are going to argue for proposed amendments, but then they're going to throw out the Constitution. That's what he said.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm disappointed you did not answer my question, so everybody here and those watching would know your answer. I will talk to you because we're constrained by time. I will talk to you after the meeting to try to get an answer to the question that I asked. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I'd be glad to try again. I thought I did answer the question.
Okay.
And
Well,
that is the founder's answer to the question.
Mr. Axtell, in fairness, I'm going to give you the last 2 minutes to make any statements that you want, and you may want to answer that question or any other statements you may have. To be fair to you, I want to give you the same amount of time. So you're on the clock for the next 2 minutes. Please, anything you want to use in summation.
You know, I've heard about fear, and I'm sad because I am very fond of many of the proponents. We've worked in the trenches, in grassroots, together for liberty, for our freedoms, and I find it really interesting that they would throw fear into the equation here. I'm a person, I swam a rapids. I tackled a small-time thief with my own hands and carried him on my shoulders to the sheriff or whatever that was coming to get him. I worked in what we then called a ghetto school, doing my student teaching. And I can go on and on and on, but 6 years ago, I was thrown against the wall here in the state capitol by a convention of state supporter. And yet I'm back. I'm still here. I'm not afraid. And I'm concerned because I would really rather fight these fights based on policy and based on truth and based on higher principles than calling each other afraid or than throwing these kinds of slanderous things back and forth. That's not how I work. I work on policy. And this is bad policy. I work on truth, and I've given you the true history from the founders and what they've said. And again, this is a bad idea. I would urge you to vote. Oh, I have one more thing. Well, I'm going to end it there. I would urge you to vote against, again, against HCR 5027.
Thank you so much for coming here today, sir. Committee, I would also direct your attention to the written opponents, Blake Branson, Judy Caller, Emily Hamburg. Those documents are, oh, I'm sorry, there's some on the back. Let me, Representative Mike Hauser, Leslie Mark, Joanna Martin, and Robert Wood. Those are in your files. Anyone else appearing? None is on my list, so I'm going to close the hearing on House Concurrent Resolution 5027. Committee, we are meeting tomorrow. We have a bill. Representative Heiberger, question?
I raised my hand early. I was just going to inquire if you intended to work any bills tomorrow.